Number 10, Hawkeye. Ultimate Hawkeye first appeared in Ultimate issue 7, and he doesn't mind going for the kill this time around. He was a SHIELD agent who wasn't as fancy when it came to arrows, he's just more military this time around. It's actually pretty dark at times. He became a super soldier once briefly when the Avengers were put on the USS Jimmy Carter. They got captured, and then Hawkeye and a few others ingested super soldier serum, and then they rescued Nick Fury. Hawkeye is a pretty sweet agent. He's badass, he gets it done. But his family life and dynamic with Black Widow this time around is much different than most would think. When a team of mercenaries broke into Clint's house early on, they took out his wife and kids, which is awful. But it gets even worse when you find out that Black Widow was the leader of said mercenary team. And then Hawkeye gets even in a pretty gruesome way. 3 arrows, perfectly placed. Gory. Pretty gory, very gory. Number 9, Nick Fury. When he entered the Ultimate and Marvel Team Up issue 5, Nick Fury would soon take over as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And his first plan was to bring back the Super Soldier program, which actually resulted in the creation of Ultimate Captain America and Ultimate Hulk, etc. His origins are pretty unique. I mean, he fought for the US in World War II, and tragically he was taken by force to be the next test subject for Project Rebirth. When he was injected with this new serum, it gave him super strength, and in turn, he freed himself and other prisoners and busted out of there. So now he's got quite the power behind those punches, and Ultimate Nick Fury is way cooler than our 616 Nick Fury because he was designed to look like Samuel L. Jackson, so it's really no contest. And before we continue on with this list of Ultimate heroes, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help our channel out a lot. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's go right back into this list. Thank you so much. Number 8, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner made his Ultimate debut in Ultimate X-Men issue 7. Now his origins here had him growing up in the Weapon X program, and he was trained to become an assassin from the start. He had a pretty dark upbringing, and in turn he would have these bad pockets with the X-Men. Like Warren and Dazzler were a couple, but Kurt also liked Dazzler, so he kidnapped her? Okay. And the team was like, hey, so we're gonna put you in a coma now because that's not cool. We can't really do that. And then he came back and he apologized. The dust was settled, no hard feelings. Okay, sure. He joined Colossus' X-Men team with Dazzler and Angel, by the way, so it was definitely fine. Kurt wasn't all bad. He was actually kind of funny, I mean, as a character, because sometimes he would use the Danger Room with Angel to reenact Pirates of the Caribbean instead of, you know, fighting bad guys. So already this version is my kind of guy. I mean, minus the kidnapping part, of course. Him and Angel were tight because they couldn't hide their mutations, so they ended up being best of friends. So they fought pirates together, chased the same girls, they're living the mutant dream in a way. Not bad. Sadly, Kurt was killed by Magneto's ultimatum wave, and it got a lot of other X-Men killed as well. So it's dark, it's nice, and then it's dark. That's the Ultimates. Number 7, Silver Searcher. So the name is a little different for Norrin Radd in the Ultimates. He made his first debut in Ultimate Fantastic Four issue 42. He was teleported to Earth after Reed Richards mistook him for a star that he wanted to harness. So he brought him here. Awesome, it wasn't his fault. So naturally the world was also in chaos because of his arrival. But Norrin said that he would summon his master who would make the population of Earth happier than they've ever been. Fresh water for all, free phone plans, taxing the rich. What is this plan, sir? The Searcher's master was Zenla's ruler at the time. Revka Termaloon Edifax Skyros III. Rolls off the tongue nice and easy, cool. Also known as the king without enemies. Let's just go with that. So this king would use mind control, that's the trick here, to get mind control and get these humans to worship them. So after Psycho Man took over the Earth, Silver Searcher rescued Mr. Fantastic and asked him to save the planet. Now the Searcher helped the Fantastic Four afterwards and then continued wandering the depths of space. Now we love to see a betrayal, especially when it's for the good side, you know? Norrin is great, and in the Ultimates, he is immortal, and he's powerful enough to go against the Phoenix, so yeah, we need more of him. Number 6, Loki. Making his first appearance in the Ultimates 2 issue 1, Loki Odinson was much more powerful here. He has the ability to shuffle time and space, as Thor simply puts it. In the beginning, Loki would fight alongside Thor and Balder. They were the Warriors 3. Now his mother was a prisoner of Odin and asked him to bring her the Norn stones, but while he was stealing them, he took out his brother Balder and of course was banished to Asgard afterwards. Now Loki can literally warp reality in the Ultimates. He can retcon history into anything he wanted to. He could create these events that just never happened, until he was depowered by Odin, of course. Now, even after he was depowered, he was still able to put up quite a fight as our normal Loki. Now, I want to see more Warriors 3 with them. Like, I would watch a show with just those three any day. It's probably gonna come, realistically, at this rate that Marvel's going at. Number 5, Iron Man. Making his first appearance in Ultimate Marvel Team-Up issue 4, Ultimate Iron Man has some medical issues as well, but it's much more bizarre this time around. It's not his heart that makes him unique, it's actually his brain. Now, he was born a genius, of course, and he was also one of 2 twin boys, the other being Gregory Stark. Now, Tony originally wanted to start his own business with his current girlfriend, Josie Gardner, but after so much pressure from his father, he decided to join the family business, and Josie ended up leaving Tony because of this. She was like, oh, I thought we had a thing? Okay, see ya. Then 6 months later, Josie tragically passed away in a plane crash. Now, the plane crash was orchestrated by Mandarin International, which was a company that used to work with Howard Stark earlier, but cut ties. Drama. So Howard wanted Tony to put all that pain into work for the company, but Tony was like, you know what, I think nanotechnology is where I'm gonna put that energy. So after his father's passing, Tony then had to fully take over the company. But by then he was a troubled celebrity, he was an alcoholic, and things got even harder for Tony when he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. So he mixed his biotech with armor and he bought himself some time. Now, Ultimate Tony Stark's tumor was actually an Infinity Stone growing in his brain. So with the nanotech body and everything, it just made him stronger, so much stronger. So this gave Tony the ability to transfer his consciousness between other machines. He's actually friends with his brain tumor in this world. His name is actually Anthony. It's a little boy. It's like a separate living hallucination boy. Totally normal. Number 4, Colossus. Making his first appearance in the 1610 universe with Ultimate X-Men issue 1, Peter Rasputin, aka Colossus, was discovered during the Cold War. He was attacked by Anatol Spichkin, but when it was confirmed that Peter was indeed a mutant, a deal was made instead. Anatol would keep his secret, and he was so ready to give Peter a job, but down the road. If he ever needed one, he had a job for him down the road. Of course, he was a giant guy made of metal. He's like, hey, I got some for you to do, trust me. Roofing, stapling, some hammering, we can find you some things. Peter's father, like most fathers in these comics, was not a pleasant man, so Peter thought, you know what, I could use some of that help now, let's go. And then he went back to Anatol because the thing is, Ultimate Colossus had thick skin, literally he was made of steel, but he wasn't strong enough where it really made a huge difference. I mean, sure, drywall is easier to punch through, but it was heavy. Like, imagine wearing a skin suit of metal. The Tin Man probably had insane calves, but it wasn't until Anatol introduced Peter to this drug called Banshee, and that's where he got the strength behind those metal mitts. So now Colossus, on narcotics, was taking on these jobs, these super strong tourist gigs, and at the age of 19, Peter was picked up from Big Boris, a Russian mafia boss, and then he worked with him for 10 years. So he just joined the mafia for 10 years from 19 to 29. You know, the usual thing you do after you're 19. He kept his powers a secret mostly for those around him, and then one day during a botched arm deal, Peter and his team were shot at. Peter survived because of his thick skin, and his mutant ability was also exposed in a much greater way. He was kind of screwed until Jean Grey found him and then offered him a spot with the X-Men. That's actually where you got the codename Colossus. Now this version is unreal. He's close with Wolverine as they both share, you know, horrible backgrounds. They would walk the streets at night just trying to solve these dark cases, looking for trouble. Imagine these two bumping into you. No chance. In Ultimate War, he took on Thor and Iron Man at the same time for 10 minutes. So, how wild is that? Number 3, Ultimate Red Skull. Making his debut in the Ultimate Comics Avengers 1 back in 2009, Ultimate Red Skull is, I know, a villain, but he wasn't always that way. He's a lot different than the Red Skull that we know from our main continuity. He's actually the son of Steve Rogers in this universe and Gail Richards. They even hid him and trained him to become the next Captain America. The Ultimates are wild. This is the dream scenario. But he always feared that he would never live up to his father's expectations. Now, it's not like he was raised in a bad household, it was kind of the opposite. He was raised to become a superhero. He was raised to fill some rather big boots. He was raised to become the next Captain America after he was declared dead in Iceland. So he kind of had the dream job, and he was more powerful than Steve Rogers as well. So what happened? So when we're talking about comebacks, I really think Ultimate Red Skull could have been a treat. Now, he was eventually in charge of the military that he grew up with. He figured out now that he was a leader, and he used it against them. His personality as well was pretty easygoing, so it wasn't hard to convince anybody what he was doing. But again, he had this mental wall where he could never live up to Father Rogers. So at age 17, he escaped and took out every doctor and soldier on that team. He just wiped everybody out. So evil. And then he used a kitchen knife to really complete the whole Red Skull look. A nice do-it-yourself makeover. Nice and haunting. So he had all the tools to be great, but that pressure of Steve Rogers took him down the wrong path. Interesting. Number 2, Magneto. He made his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1. Eric Lehnsherr was born to 2 Canadian agents of Weapon X. Now he got his abilities and mastered magnetism at a young age, and his father didn't respond well to that. He was intoxicated most of the time, and he attacked Eric one day, not an ideal living situation for a child. Now he tried to shoot Eric once, but those powers naturally came out, and then Eric pushed the bullet right back. So Eric had to spend his teen years with that guilt weighing down on him. Now eventually he was disgusted with Weapon X, the whole idea of finding a cure for the mutant gene through means of. So he used these abilities, freed Mutant X, Wolverine, who I talked about in part 1 of this list, which you for sure watched. And then Eric married a human woman named Isabel, but he left her once he met Charles Xavier. They didn't fall in love. He was fascinated. This is the first adult mutant that he's ever met, and they share the same ideologies on them. So Eric grabbed these mutant kids from a previous lover and then denied ever loving a human woman. Rough. The Brotherhood relocated to the Savage Land a few years later, and then Eric started referring to the mutants as an army, which is bad news. He was changing, as were his views on this whole mutant operation. He even started going by the name Magneto, totally abandoned his human name, and then Xavier was no longer on board. I mean, this is Supervillain 101. Anybody can see a villain in the making, especially if you can read minds. That sure does help. So Magneto made a helmet that prevented that from ever happening. This helmet prevented psi intrusion into his mind, and it also looked cool. So when Charles took a few loyal followers and made a run for it, Magneto was pretty upset and broke Charles' spine, leaving him in the wheelchair. And finally, number 1, we have Miles Morales. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, just a couple months before the death of Peter Parker. Now Norman Osborn was arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and then a young thief broke into that empty Osborn industry, and then that's where a genetically enhanced spider found its way into the thief's backpack. Now while Miles Morales was visiting his Uncle Aaron, that spider just happened to crawl out of Uncle Aaron's bag, and then it bit Miles Morales. He of course got these amazing abilities, the Spider-Man abilities, but on top of that he could also turn invisible, which is a pretty sweet gig. That plus Stun Blast makes Miles pretty hard to take down. Now the thing is, what makes him unique is at first Miles didn't really want to be a hero. He wanted to leave that up to the real Spider-Man until his untimely departure, saving his family from Osborn. So Miles got to the scene, but it was too late and too ahead of him. So he felt guilt after this for not being able to save Peter, so he suited up and joined the battle. His first villain was against Kangaroo, and he took him on wearing a Spider-Man Halloween costume, which is a great look. I honestly love Miles. I'm so happy he's in a bigger part of the Spider-Verse that we're currently in, and I'm betting that we meet live-action Miles Morales in the next Spider-Man movie. I think that's the only thing they've managed to keep a secret about that film. I'm calling it now. Guys, who would you cast for a live-action Miles Morales? Let us know in the comments.
Number 10, Double Death Peter. I don't actually have any issues with Spider-Man dying. I don't wish Peter Parker ill. I just feel like death is such a finite ending that sometimes it can be nice to have that in stories so that sometimes we can just move forward as opposed to getting stuck on repeat, stuck in a loop. What I take issue with though when it comes to Peter's deaths in Ultimates, because yeah, I feel like he definitely got more than one, was that he was killed off kind of suddenly or unceremoniously, which meant he had to be brought back again to do it right. And then after all that, we also find out that he's pretty much immortal. Granted, this does also help to make his multiple deaths make sense and give us a nice, neat little ending for Peter as he passes the torch to Miles. But still, that first death, woo, it was a doozy. During Ultimatum, it seems as though Spider-Man, after being forced to fight his nightmares, gets caught up in the midst of a huge explosion initiated by an equally frustrated Hulk. Of course, overall, he appears to survive, but it seems that the intention here originally was to kill him, and that this death was simply retconned away. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but like, I really don't like the argument between Kitty and MJ at the beginning. They're like, I love him. Well, I love him too. Oh my goodness, be quiet. I'm all about love, but that's so, I don't know, just something about it just grates me. Don't like it. You couldn't possibly understand how I feel because I love him. No, well, I love him, so you couldn't possibly understand how I feel. Ugh. Number 9, Magneto kills Professor X. While this might not seem like such a strange and unsettling thing, keep in mind that Magneto and Charles are often presented in the comic book world as being opponents, but still being friends. While this might not seem like such a strange and unsettling thing, keep in mind that Magneto and Charles are often presented in the comic book world as being opponents, but still being friends. And here, for a long while, they were actually allies on Earth 1610. History aside though, this death is a brutal one, mostly because of how easy Magneto makes it seem. Magneto kills Charles by simply breaking his neck. He just snaps it. He doesn't even go all magnetism on him, though he does do that at other times in the Ultimate Universe. I don't know what exactly Charles did to deserve his life in this reality. I mean, it's not like he ignored the growing sentience of a training room who also happened to be a mutant when he claimed to be fighting for all mutant rights, right? Oh wait. Well, you know, at least he never lied to the X-Men about it. Oh wait. Number 8. Too sexy? Question mark? Is there such a thing? When it comes to the X-Men in this reality, yes, there might just be something as too sexy. And I'm all for sexy. Here, the X-Men were notorious for being overly sexualized. There are a lot of overt sexual moments that happen with our mutants who seem to be weirdly horny a lot of the time. Look, I'm not saying that heroes and villains can't be sexy, or that they can't be sexual. This is comics after all. Sexiness is a big part of the industry and the allure and the history. But even for comics, this feels like a bit much. This also extended beyond X-Men and other characters, with Natasha and Tony's special tape, and Carol and Tony's love-hate relationship that helped them work through some mutual frustration with each other professionally. When it comes to X-Men, we also learned that Wolverine slept with Magneto's wife, Magda, which made people question who Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch's father really was. To add on to that, Wolverine then saw Wanda and Pietro together getting intimate, which is really weird, but it's especially really weird if Wolverine seems to be their dad maybe, or if that's even like a question. Bottom line, I think the thing that most frustrates me about the sexiness in Ultimates is that it feels like it did a lot of this just for the shock factor. Like, it wasn't even about like sexiness for story or like sexiness for sexiness. It was like sexiness so that people would be like, oh, gasp, what am I reading?
Number 7, the Hulk. First appearing in Ultimate Marvel Team Up issue 2, he's still big, he's still angry, but this time around he is gray. Okay. Now before this, however, Bruce Banner wanted to be just like Captain America, back before he was the Hulk, back before he was big and strong. So at Cambridge University, he was committed to duplicating the Super Soldier Serum with helps of Nick Fury's Super Soldier blood. So he used it on himself, and honestly, already I'm a fan of Bruce Banner more. I mean, the Hulk hasn't even been created yet, and then Nick Fury, the first Super Soldier, gathered the best genetic engineers to recreate the serum, and Bruce was luckily amongst them. So Bruce actually thought that he figured this thing out, but again, he wanted to be like Cap and he wanted to stay quiet, so he tested this new serum out on himself, and then he ended up becoming Ultimate Hulk. Later on, Bruce decided to make even more serum, so he mixed Super Soldier Serum again with this new Hulk serum, smashed them together, injected himself, so now Super Soldier Nick Fury actually made Banner the Hulk in this timeline. That's a cool sentence right there. Number 6. Deadpool. Meet Wade Wilson. He had a pretty rough go in the Ultimates, as do most of them. I'd say more intense than his 616 counterpart, because in Ultimate Spider-Man, Wilson gets hired by the Ganosian government, but of course in Deadpool's spirit, he gets hired to double down and hunt these mutants, but it's also a TV event. It's fun. And then when Deadpool is going up against Spider-Man, he actually gets unmasked. And his appearance is even more shocking in this reality. Even the host has to apologize to the viewers at home, because his mask, I mean, to begin with, wasn't even really a mask, it's translucent, so not really the best. And then Spider-Man even adds insult to injury, saying that his face smells like a KFC dumpster on a hot day. So if anybody needs redemption, it's definitely Wade Wilson from the Ultimates. Number 5, Juggernaut. The first time we see him, it's very clear that he's more powerful. Something is up with this X-Men. He looked like a future version of the Juggernaut. It was pretty intimidating. Now he looks like an evil stripper from the future, which is, honestly, I like it. It's cool. He was a genius in this universe as well. I mean, literally, the guy was super smart. He grew up in the same trailer park as Rogue, and he still considered himself trailer trash, although he was one of the smartest people alive. Guys, never doubt yourself. Things took a turn when he was taken by Weapon X and forced to be this living weapon of mass destruction. Then following the orders of Colonel John Wraith, he was part of their strike force that took out the X-Men, or even worse, forced the X-Men into Weapon X, which we heard plenty of early on in this list. He walked tall and mighty until he got taken out in the dumbest way possible. Like the Juggernaut, this makes me upset. He for sure needs a redemption, that's all I'm saying. Even when he's fighting Rogue later on, he still wants them to be happy and in love. He still wants that dream, so he's still a good guy deep down. And then Ultimate X-Men issue 99, in the middle of a fight, he gets taken down because of a poisonous dart. A dart. Yeah, just one of those. That's it. The Juggernaut got taken out by a dart. It went right through his visor gap. I mean, amazing aim, but come on. This is the same guy that dropped a building on Gambit? Number 4, Mr. Fantastic. Reed Richards needs a redemption on screen before anything else. I mean, the last Fantastic Four movie, I mean, if you haven't watched it, honestly, don't. Marvel's redoing them soon. You might as well just wait it out. In the Ultimate version, it was dark, and he was younger, and honestly, he was cooler. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four issue 1, and even at the start of Ultimatum, when that big wave hit, Sue bites the bullet, and he didn't waste any time. He's not happy. He immediately blames Namor, and by blaming, I mean he knocks him out first and then asks questions later. Okay, Reed, chill. Eventually, he becomes a villain in this universe, referring to himself as the Maker, and caused some trouble in the 616 universe as well, after his universe was destroyed. Now, this is the Mr. Fantastic that we need. This guy gets the job done. He's scary. Number 3, Wolverine. Making his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1, he didn't remember his past, and he thinks that he was once married. He has a ring, and he thinks Sabretooth killed his family. It's all a blur. Stressful. No thanks to Weapon X. Now, Ultimate James Howlett is actually the first mutant, and it turns out that this time around, you can kill Wolverine. You just have to rip his bones out that happen to have adamantium built into it. That ought to do it. Also, so painful. This all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event, and Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outward like water bursting through a dam. There's a nice picture for you. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I don't know what is. Number 2, Thor. Making his first entry in the Ultimates with issue 4, Thor Odinson actually looks a lot like our current MCU Thor, and I think he might have more in common than we think. For starters, the Ultimate Thor needs a magic belt to have powers, and in Spider-Man Homecoming, Happy mentions Thor's magic belt and all the stuff that they're packing up on Moving Day. So Thor just might need this come Love and Thunder, but in the comics, Loki was convincing everybody that Thor is just an insane dude with a magic belt. And they kind of bought it. What happens was, he wasn't worthy yet, so he got his ass kicked, and then finally in Ultimates 2, issue 12, he gets his powers back. But the fact that this Thor went through all that to begin with, so sad. Definitely so sad. Number 1, Quicksilver. Okay, yeah, he's in love with his sister in the Ultimates, and it's weird, and it's gross. Yeah, sure. But this Quicksilver otherwise was far more superior. He was faster in the Ultimate Universe, he was supersonic when it comes to speeds. He almost reached the speed of light at one point, like, come on, dude. And as long as he's still alive, he can always re-heal himself. In Ultimate Wolverine issue 3, Pietro grabs Logan and runs with him. He was actually trying to tear the flesh off him, and if it was anybody else but Wolverine, it probably would have worked. And in Ultimate Comics 29, he heals himself using his super fast metabolism, and he uses his super speed to study Reed Richards' notes. He says he's not smart, but he is fast, so he ran the math nearly 100,000 times. That's insane. Quicksilver needs a comeback for sure, more so on screen than I think any superhero right now. Hashtag Ralph Bone.
Number 10, Marvel Zombies. I wouldn't say I hate Marvel Zombies by any means, but it is a world that I'm often reluctant to visit. And yet, here I go, talking about it again. Thank you so much for this, Ultimates. Thank you. I love talking about Marvel Zombies. The alternate universe of Marvel Zombies was actually introduced in the Ultimate line. We learned of this alternate reality when the Fantastic Four of 1610 would be forced into a confrontation with the reality-hopping zombie versions of themselves from Earth Z, aka 2149, who first appeared in Ultimate Fantastic Four in issue 21. Marvel Zombies is a pretty cool idea for an alternate Marvel world, to be honest, especially in the early 2000s when zombies were all the rage with the success of both The Walking Dead and Shaun of the Dead. Honestly, I really love Shaun of the Dead. I think it's one of my favorite movies. However, Marvel Zombies has also now been done to death, or undeath if you will. Often I've found zombie stories suffer from feeling the need to use excessive gore in order to sell us. Like sometimes happens with the Ultimates. There are times when it feels as though it's just all about shocking the readers. And I don't mind being shocked, but I like being shocked when it's like for a purpose, not just being shocked because be shocked by comics, you know what I mean? Number 9, Jean Grey and Wolverine's son? I gotta say, I don't mind Jean Grey becoming a villain in stories, but there are some strange things that go on with her character in terms of motivations on Earth 1610 that do bother me. A big one being the flirty moments that we see between her and Wolverine's son, Jimmy Hudson. For those who aren't aware, Jimmy was the son of Wolverine who was raised by a war buddy of Logan's and his family. Jimmy wouldn't learn until he was older of his true heritage and the fact that he was Logan's biological son. On Earth 1610, Jean Grey spent some time initially dating Wolverine before she ended up with Cyclops, and, of course, before Wolverine died. Cyclops actually also later dies. Jean just can't catch a break, I guess, in terms of her partner staying alive. Her being the former lover of Wolverine, though, is what makes so many of her flirtatious moments with Jimmy so uncomfortable and weird. He's the son of her ex. Like, what is happening? Also, maybe not everybody got those vibes, but I definitely got those vibes, and I want to be like, what's going on? And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving these lists, all the parts of them, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. I know sometimes in fandoms we love to hate things, and I feel like that's sometimes what these lists are about. But that's okay. It can be fun, as long as it's all in good fun, and we can respect the cool stuff that we know about in the comics as well. Number 8, character motivations. Another thing that seemed to happen in the world of Ultimates was that some characters' motivations seemed to, make less sense than in 616. There were characters who were deemed evil for no real reason, or people who won fights without much explanation or justification for how they beat down someone who was kind of intended to be at their level or possibly above it. A lot of people wished others ill for strange reasons or did things that completely betrayed what they claimed to believe in. Of course, hypocrisy in the world is a very real thing, but I'm not sure we see hypocrisy every day that is quite at the level of what we saw with some characters in Ultimates. Number 7, Giant Man eats the Blob. Everybody is eating everybody in Ultimates. I don't know what it is with this world and cannibalism. I guess to be like really edgy, that is one of the final ingredients that you need. I don't know. And you gotta have it in spades, I guess. On part 1, we talked about how Blob was caught devouring the Wasp, and in revenge for the Blob's actions, Hank decided to give him a taste of his own medicine when he found him. As Giant Man, Hank pays the Blob back in kind by killing him through, you guessed it, eating him, biting off his head, clean off. Ugh. Or well, it doesn't look too clean, but you know what I mean. The other awful thing about this gruesome death is that it doesn't really give us even enough time to process the awfulness that was Janet being eaten just like a few moments ago. The story just rushes us through to the next like excessively violent and vengeful moment. And friends, if you occasionally love to hate things, and I know you do. This is fandoms. This is what we do sometimes. We lovingly hate things. Be sure to show that love to hate by giving this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much if you've already done it. It really does help us out, so thank you. Number 6, death of Cyclops. Quicksilver ends up assassinating Cyclops because he wants to carry on in his father's footsteps. No, Quicksilver, no! Did you not just see what happened during Ultimatum? It wasn't good. We do not need more hardcore Magneto. It was a mess. The other thing that was really weird about this death is that it didn't really lead to anything for Quicksilver. He said he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, continue his dad's work, create a new brotherhood, but nothing big really ever comes of this. Like, I mean, he creates a new brotherhood, but it's just like a lot of running around without much going on. There's no through line here for this narrative. Number 5, Mr. Sinister. Like, I know Mr. Sinister is kind of a crazy dude, but I feel like we made him crazy in a less interesting way here in Ultimates, if that makes sense. Instead of being obsessed with evolution and teaming up with Apocalypse in order to improve himself, adopting the name Sinister because it's what his wife called him, Nathaniel Essex was instead someone who worked at Oscorp working on a potential new super soldier serum. Because in Ultimates, everything comes back to super soldiers. Now, I personally feel that Mr. Sinister is lesser than in comparison to his 616 counterpart, who is both fabulous, wicked, ruthless, and strangely sane for someone who is so deranged. He's both sane and insane at the same time. I don't know how he does it. But what really irks me is how downplayed and modernized Sinister's look is here in Ultimates. I have 3 words: needs more capes. Number 4, Ultron loves Wanda? One of the weirdest things to happen in Ultimates was when it was actually just a straight up thing that Ultron loved Wanda. Some people have theorized even in the MCU that Vision only loves Wanda because Ultron did, but me, personally, I like to try and distance myself as far as possible from this really weird and strange plot when it comes to theories. I'm not saying that robots don't deserve love. They do deserve love. But in Ultron's case, maybe they don't. I don't know. Ultron saw Pietro as a major competitor for Wanda's affections. For more on that, see part 1 of this list. And when Ultron realized he couldn't have her, he decided no one would, killing her instead. He killed her because he loved her. This excuse in my mind never makes for a great love story or plot, by the way. Don't kill people because you love them. What is that? What is that? Number 3, World War X. I mean, this as an idea on paper seems pretty cool, but where it falls apart is, well, pretty much at the beginning. The whole issue is that the reason for these two groups wanting to actually go to war just doesn't really feel, I don't know, justified. Basically what goes down here is you have Kitty Pryde ruling over Utopia and Jean Grey ruling over Xi'an, or Tian. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but I promise I'm trying. It isn't even really explained how Jean Grey came to be the one in power. She was just appointed to take over by the surviving Zorn brother who died somehow, I think? I don't know what happened there. Jean wants Utopia and Xi'an to become one mutant nation, but Kitty isn't interested in joining. Jean says she doesn't want a war, but insists that Kitty started it, so now there has to be one, even though she doesn't want one? All because Kitty killed some androids left to her by the Zorn brothers. Yeah. And from there, it just gets more ridiculous and weird. I like the idea of a mutant versus mutant faction fight, but this was a weird one. I think you gotta really make it justified, like with Cyclops versus Wolverine, when they kind of had like two different ideologies on how to approach leadership, and then it was like, which team are you? That makes sense to me. Number 2, extreme domestic dispute. Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne have always had a troubled marriage in the comics. Ever since that fateful panel where Hank dramatically and intentionally struck Janet, Hank has been thought of as a troubled man who is more inclined to hurt the ones he loves and thus drives them away. This panel was intended by editor Jim Shooter to actually be redrawn, as he felt the moment should actually be an accident, not something intentional. However, they ran out of time to redo it, and to this day, this action has haunted the character of Hank Pym. So much so that on Earth 1610, it was simply imagined of like how much worse he could possibly be to poor Janet. They were like, how worse can this get? Here she tries to stand by Hank even after their relationship gets really rough. It gets really bad when she and Hank end up in a fight with one another, with Janet using her powers against him. While she is shrunk down, Hank then sends his army of ants after her, almost killing Janet as she goes into anaphylactic shock from all the ant stings and bites. It's just terrible. Number 1, blood and gore. Another issue that people had with the Ultimate Universe? Just all the blood and gore that we saw here. And more specifically, all the needless blood and gore. The Ultimate Universe took violence to a new level, and while I'm actually a fan of a gory scene when it holds meaning, many felt that much of what we saw was gratuitous. It was there for the shock factor. Like some of the Marvel Max series that we got, it was more about shocking readers than using the violence or gore to say something really important. There are examples of this littered throughout Ultimates, from Natasha's brutal death at the hands of Hawkeye, not that she didn't deserve it, who pinned her to the wall with arrows, to heads exploding, decapitation, and of course, just lots of cannibalism. Nothing was too gruesome, it seemed, for the Earth of 1610. Number 10, Tony and Natasha. Yep, in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, Iron Man and Black Widow are an item. But what's worse, Black Widow turns out to be working as a double agent and betrays the team in Ultimates 2. Turns out she was working with the Liberators. This all happens just as Tony and Natasha are preparing to tie the knot. Fortunately, Tony is able to apprehend Natasha, stop her, and turn her over to the authorities, but not before she manages to kill his longtime butler and friend, Jarvis, and get all of Hawkeye's family killed and him captured. Tony finds himself distraught, and matters are made even worse after Black Widow's capture and later on her death, when a very intimate and personal video the two made together is leaked to the public. Yikes. Number 9, actual cannibal Hulk. Hulk in the Ultimate Universe was a much more gruesome version of himself. He was depicted as being a lot more violent, even killing people when he went into a rage. However, this is the Ultimate, so even this more violent and uncontrolled take on his character was not enough. Hulk wouldn't just lose control and kill people, he also had a habit of eating the people he killed as well. I mean, I know he's meant to be a monstrous figure even on Earth 616, but it feels like they took it a little too far here. Also, what's up with the Ultimate Universe and cannibalism? That's like a thing that just keeps coming up. Number 8, the one true enemy of the great Charles Xavier. Stairs! It was something that hadn't really been done when it came to defeating Professor X, throwing him down some stairs. But there was also probably a reason for this, because I mean, it's just not a thing that needs to happen in the comics, and yet nothing was considered off the table in Ultimates. This is the moment, by the way, that is featured in our thumbnail for this video, and you might be wondering, hold on, wait a minute, is that Wolverine throwing Charles down the stairs? And fear not, true believer, at least they didn't steep that low. That's actually Mr. Sinister, and yeah, he looks a little different in the Ultimate Universe. If you're like, but where's his cape and the things? And it looks different here. Number 7, Blue Tony. One of the weirdest things about Ultimates has to have been the initial origin story that we got for Tony Stark. Originally, Tony Stark was given a very different backstory from his 616 counterpart. He was born as one big brain. Due to his mother suffering from an accident while she was pregnant with him, his genetic makeup was affected and he developed neural tissue throughout his entire body. Hence why I say he's a big brain, despite the fact that, you know, he appears human. So just to be clear, he doesn't look just like a big brain. He looks like a person, but he is a big brain, technically. Tony would evidently be hyper intelligent because of this alteration to his genetics, but he would also have hypersensitive skin. Even the air just touching him felt like intense burns all over his body. Because of this, his father created an armor for him to wear and to protect Tony and allow him to exist semi-normally. This liquid armor his father created also turned his skin blue, hence me calling this point Blue Tony, because he was blue. This version of Tony would get 2 miniseries, but his origins would end up being one of the many things to be retconned away. Number 6, retcons. Retcons on retcons on retcons. Would you like some retcons with that retcon? When it comes to Ultimate Universe, there are so many retcons, it can actually be hard to even keep up with all of them. And so many things were just so bizarre that we might not even remember them as existing. Never mind them being retconned out of existence. Seriously, with Ultimates, I really need that retcon button. Friends, I need a button at my desk that I can just smash every time I find a retcon, so I can have like a counter of all the ones. And never mind the retcons we may have forgotten, there are also the ones that we do remember, jarringly so, because they were never even justified or explained. The retcons that just randomly showed up and you were like, wait, what's happening now? Did I miss something? No, it was just never explained. Or the ones that their explanations were so strange and far-fetched that we simply struggle to remember them because we're like, that doesn't even make sense, so I'm not even gonna put that in my brain. There is, for example, Wanda, aka the Scarlet Witch's death, but then she came back to life, her brother Pietro's death, who also miraculously actually comes back to life. I don't even know if that one was ever explained. Black Panther becoming Steve Rogers, but then just going back to being Captain America without much explanation of what happened to T'Challa afterwards. We know he went home, and so it kind of gets a little fuzzy there. And of course, we just talked about Blue Tony as well. That origin was retconned actually to be the plot of an anime series based on Iron Man that existed in the universe. Because why not? I mean, at least that's a reason that could make sense. Although, if you owned all of those 2 miniseries that were Blue Tony, you'd be like, what did I buy? I bought something that's apparently about an anime now in the world. How would you feel about that? Number 5, dropped plots. Within Ultimates, there were also tons of covers and teases for plots that never really led us anywhere. Hulk was apparently going to join the X-Men, T'Challa was meant to join the Ultimates, but he randomly left and then he never really returned. Quicksilver intended to follow in his father's footsteps, but never really built to any great huge plot. Magneto was killed by Cyclops, but then randomly just shows back up again to console his son, and then I don't think we ever see him again after that, so that's confusing. Various covers teased at scenarios that simply never came to pass. And I'm not talking about alternate covers either, I am talking about main covers. Comic book covers are supposed to give us an indication of the story to come, the story that's inside the comic, a hint at something that exists within that issue. Not completely mislead us with promises of grandeur, showing us scenarios or team-ups that just never happen. And with Ultimates, this was sometimes simply the way. For a world that was meant to be made less confusing by the fact that it didn't have years of continuity to deal with, the Ultimate Universe became really messy pretty fast. Number 4, Kitty and MJ fight over Spider-Man. This whole fight in Ultimatum just, it kills me. While Peter Parker in 616 is often either shipped with Mary Jane Watson, Gwen Stacy, or Black Cat, Felicia Hardy, in 1610, he, for a time, dated Kitty Pryde, who was about the same age as Peter, so it makes sense, it's kinda cute. And the two also teamed up together fighting crime as supers, which also, cute. However, Kitty and Peter wouldn't end up staying together and eventually they would break up and he'd end up more predictably with MJ. Despite the fact that Kitty and Peter ended things pretty amicably. We see Kitty and MJ arguing over who loves Peter more during Ultimatum. Just another reason to consider Ultimatum one of the lowest points of the Ultimate line. There is something so annoying and so ridiculous about these two girls bickering over who really loves Peter the most, especially as the world is like falling apart around them. I'm like, what's happening? Why are we having this conversation right now? Why are we having this conversation at all? I guess it's also just like, I don't think that's what would be happening with these characters. In my mind, I'm like, I don't believe it. Number 3, Jonathan Hickman. One of the worst things to happen to the Ultimate Universe would probably be Jonathan Hickman leaving it. But also, maybe just Jonathan Hickman in general. Hickman was one of the creatives called in to help revive the Ultimate line after it had been murked by Ultimatum. In the end, the creative paramedics would not be able to save it, despite breathing new and exciting life into it. In fact, years down the line, after Hickman had left Ultimates, he'd kind of also be the one to destroy it, with his Avengers run where we learn about the incursions and where eventually the Time Runs Out storyline would take place. However, the Ultimate line might be gone, but the Ultimate Universe would be brought back to life later on. In fact, actually, Hickman is still a huge Maker fan, and even has been intertwining the 1610 version of Reed Richards' Children of Tomorrow into his current X-Men run and the world of X-Men with the Children of the Vault. So, it's like a mixed bag with Jonathan Hickman. He's like the worst thing to have left, the worst thing to have happened because he killed it. But he also, obviously, I feel like he loves Ultimates. I feel like it does hold a special place in his heart, because I feel like he loves a lot of the characters there. So, yeah, I don't know. I love it. Who doesn't love the Maker, though? Am I right? He's just so cool. Such a freaky guy. Number 2, Wolverine creeps on MJ. One of the weirdest things to happen in the Ultimate Universe takes place during a case of the body swaps. Wolverine and Spider-Man wake up one day in one another's bodies without any idea of how they got there. Just like in the main continuity reality of Earth 616, these two don't really get along in the Ultimate Universe. They end up discovering what happened and making contact with one another, planning to meet up and basically figure out like how to swap back or like what's going on. But after this all gets resolved, we also learn that Wolverine, who is not just an adult man, by the way, but potentially a super old adult man due to his healing factor, attempted, while in Peter's body, to make very intimate and adult moves on Mary Jane, Peter's girlfriend, who here is also a teenager. Ew! Like, I know you have a thing for redheads, bub, but stick to redheaded adults, not teenagers. Ugh. Gross. Number 1, Ultimate Doom. Doom was such a mess in the Ultimate Universe, just because of all the ever-developing retcons about which Doom was the real Doom. Victor Van Dame was our Doom of Earth 1610, but we later learned that actions we believed were him were actually a Doom bot, and that he'd also actually been replaced for a time by Mary Storm. He was like basically going into alternate realities. It's a lot. If you thought Doom of Earth 616 with all of his Doom bots was confusing, the continuity here is, well, it's really only more of a mess in my mind, especially considering how some important actions were later retconned as not being caused by Doom, and how it became confusing going back to know like when Doom was actually the true Doom or when it had been an imposter in disguise. Did you get all of that? Yeah. Me neither. Number 10, Hawkeye. Clint Barton might often be thought of as a man who just runs around with a bow and some arrows, but the Ultimate Universe took his character to a whole new level. Hawkeye became more grounded in reality with a masterful archer who can shoot off 6 arrows faster than a human can fire 6 bullets. In this reality, he was also given enhanced vision, which allows him to see at an increased distance and granted him a better sense of contrast, as it's believed he sees more in black and white than in color. He was even implied to be able to see so well that he can use his eyes to tell him what is true and what is not. Pretty insane. Number 9, the real Black Panther. And if you're wondering why I'm saying the real one, because there was a time when Captain America was Black Panther in Ultimates, but that's a story for another time. Black Panther has a really different and kind of weird story in Ultimates. He actually ends up getting a similar treatment to Wolverine in this universe, joining the Weapon X program. Here, T'Challa is given Weapon X claws and has his general strength, speed, and stamina increased even further by the Weapon X program. In Ultimates, he also possesses a regenerative of healing factor, and he is believed to be a mutant in terms of origins. Black Panther was given his code name by Weapon X, who gave him the name after helping to save his life after he fought a Black Panther in Wakanda to prove himself a viable leader as the second-born son of King T'Chaka. Yeah, in this reality, T'Challa is the second-born son. And actually, M'Baku is his older brother. Number 8. Doctor Strange. In theory, Doctor Strange's son, Stephen Strange Jr., also known as Doctor Strange, should likely not have died in the way that he did, considering how powerful he is. Although not as talented as his father, Strange was still a skilled magic user. It is implied, based on the artifacts that he holds and his place in the Sanctum Sanctorium, that despite his youth and his inexperience, he may have still held the title of Sorcerer Supreme in the reality of 1610, which should mean he's pretty powerful. Though of course, this is never really confirmed, so. Strange manages to defeat Nightmare when he possesses Spider-Man, teams up with Ultimate Knights in a fight against Kingpin, but ultimately is defeated and brutally killed by Dormammu, who strangles him with his own cloak and constricts him until his head explodes. It's pretty violent and pretty dark. Despite his gruesome death, Strange was still considered to be a powerful magic user and also possessed telepathic abilities besides. While he went by the name of Doctor Strange, he himself was not a licensed or practicing medical doctor. He was the son of Doctor Strange and Clea. Number 7. Liberators. Okay, so don't get me wrong, I like the idea of the Liberators. It was more the way that this all went down with them in the end, and the way that these international heroes, but villains to the Ultimates, were portrayed. The Liberators were a team of superpowered folks from around the globe who had come together to defeat the Ultimates so as to even the playing field on a global level for the rest of the world. Basically, these characters thought that the USA was becoming too powerful and was messing things up for other countries with their superhero team. This could have been an interesting story, actually, in terms of like global international politics, but instead it just became about how every other country was inferior to the US, with their heroes, the Ultimates, winning the day simply because they were kind of deemed superior. And I'm pretty sure there's a line in there that communicates almost verbatim that sentiment. Number 6. Black Panther is Steve Rogers? There is a time that Black Panther is Steve Rogers in these comics. What went down is that basically Black Panther was recruited to the Ultimates but didn't really want to join the team. I mean, that's a whole other story that is pretty weird and problematic. He was kind of made to join the team against his will. On Nick Fury's orders, Black Panther, however, was also not allowed to leave or ever return to his home and see his family in Wakanda. Steve had been training Black Panther and he felt bad for T'Challa, so he decided to basically take Black Panther's place so that he could return home to visit his family. Temporarily, of course. At least, it seemed as though the sub-in was meant to be something temporary. It was implied in the comics that Black Panther would basically go visit his family for a while, and then he'd return to relieve Steve. That isn't what happened, though, and instead Steve remained as Black Panther until eventually he just went back to being Captain America again, and Black Panther sort of seemingly disappeared off the team without any explanation. He does come back, I think, for one mission, and then he quits. But, yeah, it's also kind of weird that he quits. I guess things changed and he could quit at that point? Yeah, it's strange. Another one of the strangest moments in terms of this story is when Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, seemingly recognizes that Steve is actually Black Panther because of the way he moves. Apparently no one else can move like Steve Rogers. Number 5. Blob eats the Wasp. During the events of Ultimatum, a lot of awful things went down. One of those things was the death of the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne. She was for a time the leader of the Ultimates and actually proved to be a quite capable, resourceful, and powerful member of the team, but none of that could save her from the Ultimate Wave. Janet was one of the heroes to be killed during the Ultimate Wave, and her body was found by Hawkeye and Giant Man. The worst part wasn't even that she died, but instead was the aftermath of that. Hawkeye and Giant Man found the Wasp's corpse, which was being violently torn apart and eaten by the Brotherhood member, the Blob. Ew. Why so much cannibalism, though? Number 4. Magneto kills everyone. Normally, I wouldn't have a problem with Magneto killing people. After all, he's a major X-Men villain, and to have Magneto tell the story, most of the people that he kills, they deserve it. They themselves are usually murderers in some way. It's what makes him such a compelling villain, and at times an anti-hero. Right now, he's gone full hero in the comics, which means that he really holds people up to high standards in Krakoa when it comes to their law about not killing humans. After all, he knows what it's like to feel justified in disposing of human enemies, and even he is willing to agree that overall it's just a bad idea. So there's really no way of finding justification if that's your crime in Krakoa right now. In Ultimates, Magneto, however, goes from being Professor X's friend and partner in mutant team building and safe space creating to thinking that mutants are basically better than humans and believing that humans should either serve mutants or completely be exterminated. Does believing that you belong to a superior race sound like anything else to you? Magneto kills billions of people in the pursuit of this belief, which, considering his history as a victim and survivor of the camps in World War II, is pretty shocking and feels out of character. And if you're wondering, well, is that still a thing in Ultimates? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's still established in Ultimates, so yeah. Number 3, Wanda and Pietro. Initially, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver had a similar relationship to their 616 counterparts, with Pietro being established as just an overprotective brother. Ultimates then took this a step further, with it being kind of a joke that they were maybe like a little too close, with them even being presented as being overly flirty with one another. But eventually, this was then taken to the next level. A level we probably never should have gone to, where the brother and sister duo were in a full-blown romantic and intimate relationship with one another, and Wolverine even caught them being intimate. And this was something that many fans felt was taking their relationship way too far. Pietro even is considered a rival when it comes to anyone else competing for Wanda's affections. I love how Earth 1610 was about trying completely different things with characters, and yet the close siblings were simply just brought too close together. I mean, they could have done something really different with these two and made them two estranged siblings or people that were unrelated to each other. That's something that would really be breaking new ground. Where's my story where they were split up at birth and so they never knew about the other one and then they find their long lost twin? That could be a cool story. Number 2, Ultimates 3. Many of these worst moments that have been laid out before you today come to us from Ultimates 3, which is where the wheels really began to fall off the Ultimates train. I mean, Ultimates 2 also had its problems, but I don't know if there were quite as many as Ultimates 3. Ultimates would later be relaunched by Jonathan Hickman and Asad Ribish in hope to save it, but the damage had already been done. The line was doomed to die and would die during the incursions, with the worlds colliding and being rolled into one giant ball of fun that we'd come to know as Doom's Battle World. Of course, then later it'd be brought back, so nah. Number 1, Ultimatum. What could possibly be worse than a brother and sister in a romantic relationship and Ultimates 3, where many problematic stories either got worse or got started? How about the thing that simply straight up killed the Ultimate Universe, or at least felt like it tried to? Ultimatum. Ultimatum was the crossover event that caused mass devastation to the universe and the world, wiping out many of the characters that we'd come to know and love, or at the very least tolerate. Jeff Loeb was basically given the green light by Marvel to kill off all characters who were too similar to their Earth 616 counterparts to really shake up the Ultimate Universe. What ended up happening as a result was many people, heroes, and villains dying due to their heads being blown up or torn off, having an overly gruesome and violent end. Then there were deaths that were never even shown of major characters who died in the Ultimate Wave. And finally, there were also tons of characters whose corpses were eaten after or during their death, or who ended up tortured to death. It was just an overly violent mess of an event with death after death, till you became just basically numb to what was going on. Ultimatum is also the event where Magneto decided to basically go nuts and kill billions of people. He would snap Professor X's neck and then would later have his own head blown off by Cyclops' optic blasts. Like I said, just so many heads being blown off. It makes my head want to explode. Number 10, She-Hulk. In Ultimates, Jennifer Walters is not She-Hulk, Betty Ross is. She ended up stealing the formula that would cause her transformation from Walters, who here is a doctor and scientist instead. Betty needed the formula to try and save Bruce Banner, the Hulk, who Nick Fury had sent Wolverine to assassinate. Betty had tried everything else she could think of to interfere with Fury's plans, and this was the only option really left to her. Stealing the formula, she was pursued, but injected it in time, becoming the Jade Giantess She-Hulk. The serum made it so that rage was not a part of the transformation, meaning that Betty got to keep her wits and maintain a sense of level-headedness while transformed. She would end up pursuing the Hulk and reconnect with him, but the two would ultimately end up fighting one another. Afterwards, She-Hulk found herself defeated by Wolverine and was later taken in by S.H.I.E.L.D., only apprehended likely because Wolverine made her wear a collar that basically prevented her from transforming. Number 9. Miles Morales. One of my favorite characters to come from 1610, we have Spider-Man, aka Miles Morales. Miles was so powerful in terms of his popularity that he was one of the few characters to survive the destruction of Earth 1610. He ended up moving over to Earth 616, given a place there once the world was reconstructed by Molecule Man and Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four. Molecule Man actually ended up saving Miles because he ended up giving him a burger when he was hungry. Gotta love those pocket burgers. In a way, it's always been Miles' quirkiness and kindness that has remained one of his greatest strengths. But aside from that, he's also one of the most powerful Spider-Men, or spider-folk, around. He not only has the proportional strength of a spider, making him super strong, but can also camouflage his body to match his surroundings, rendering him pretty much invisible to the untrained eye, and comes with his Venom Blast, which allows him to deal devastating electrical shocks to his opponents. Now, every time I say Venom Blast, I just think of the Jessica Drew Spider-Woman cartoon from the 70s. Oh my goodness, Venom Blast. Number 8, Invisible Woman. Sue would end up in the ultimate reality married to Ben Grimm, but initially would fall for Reed, just like in the Earth 616 reality. She would also stay loyal to him for quite some time, despite the fact that, like on Earth 616, he tended to become obsessed with science to the point of, well, kind of ignoring her. Sue herself was also a genius and ended up with 4 doctorates in biochemical science before she entered her 20s. She possesses an IQ of 170, not far off from Tony Stark in this reality. Her powers allow her to turn invisible, generate force fields and shields. She can use these shields to protect defensively or to destroy and attack offensively. Many times, Sue has used her abilities to save her teammates' lives. Number 7, Carnage, aka Gwen Stacy, or really more specifically Gwen Stacy's clone, I should say. Gwen ended up being killed by Carnage, and during that process was in a way also kind of reborn through the symbiote. You can tell the OG version of Gwen Stacy from the Ultimates apart from the later appearing clone from the line by looking at the color of her eyes. Gwen originally had hazel eyes in this universe, but her cloned version, who was also for a time Carnage, had blue eyes. Although in her Carnage form, her eyes became white, of course. Well, you might not think of Carnage as a hero here due to its history on Earth 616 and its origins as a symbiote here, as well as its attachment to Gwen. It was kind of a mash between a heroic and villainous entity, so it wasn't really a villain here. During her time as Carnage, Gwen possessed powers similar to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this list and you want more Ultimates lists, please let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, thank you. It really helps us out when you do that, so thanks. Number 6, Peter Parker. Sure, he died, but he was still pretty strong regardless, and he only died twice. Also, don't get me wrong, I do not wish for the death of Peter, but in general, I'm just kind of glad that death itself was a thing in the Ultimate Universe. It meant actions and stories had, actual consequences. I mean, sort of. Peter kind of died twice, and he didn't stay dead. The more memorable death to me is the one where he died in a brutal fight against the Sinister Six, working to protect those he loved, while also watching as they did their part to protect him as well. Oh my goodness! It was actually a really beautiful conclusion for the hero, with him finally accepting that while he couldn't save his Uncle Ben, at least he could save the other people in his life whom he loved. It was like a really heartbreaking moment. But then, of course, later on, Peter was resurrected, which I guess for the purpose of this list makes him even more powerful as Spider-Man because he came back from the dead. But it also kind of ruined the whole story of his death for me. So, Number 5, Nick Fury. Fury ranks so high on this list because, well, he's kind of in charge of many different superpowered characters and knows what buttons to push to get them to do his bidding and make them work for him. Fury was the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Ultimate Universe and was also exposed to the Super Soldier Serum as well, which gave him enhanced strength, durability, speed, and enhanced healing on the same level as Captain America. His healing factor, of course, was not strong enough to regenerate his eye, which remained gone pretty much forever. Even without insane superpowers, this version of Fury is not someone you'd want to mess with, as he also has some of the most powerful tech at his disposal, which can do things like allow him to walk on air and turn invisible. Number 4, The Thing. In this reality, the Thing and Susan Storm, the Invisible Woman, end up together, with Susan leaving Reed Richards to be with Ben. Ben Grimm was mutated after exposure to the End Zone, turning into a rock-like monster creature. However, later on in the Earth 1610 universe, he would gain the ability to actually change form at will after experiencing a secondary mutation, which also gave him his purple form. As such, he can switch between human form and rock form. While in his rock form, Ben is super strong. As a result of his mutation, he also had enhanced durability and endurance. He can withstand extremely hot and extremely cold temperatures as well for a short amount of time. Ben is actually considered to be so strong and massive in his rock form that he has to wear a containment suit. Otherwise, each step that he takes would actually cause destruction within his nearby vicinity. That is just how powerful he is. Number 3, the Hulk. While the Thing has beat the Hulk in the Ultimate Universe before, I still think he's a little more powerful, though not nearly as powerful as his Earth 616 counterpart. I feel like one of the things that we also need to consider about Ultimate Hulk is how many times he's been boosted up in the Ultimate Universe. One of his weaknesses is adamantium, which is strong enough when sharpened or enough force is applied to pierce the Hulk's thick skin. But if Hulk gets angry enough, even this won't work on him. And he also at one point to himself is bonded with adamantium, so Hulk also received a power boost from Galactus, and at one point wielded an incomplete set of the Ultimate Infinity Gauntlets, giving him another power boost. Hulk was initially a member of the Ultimates, but would later on end up serving on the Maker's Dark Ultimates team. Number 2, Hercules. Hercules of Earth 1610 was recruited by Nick Fury to join his Howling Commandos, who he sent to battle the Maker and the Dark Ultimates. Hercules is believed to have godlike powers, granting him superhuman deity-level strength. It's still believed, however, that he could be weaker than his Earth 616 counterpart, but I personally am not so sure about that fact. Hercules here squared off with Ultimate Hulk while his power levels were boosted by Galactus and managed to defeat him solo. Hercules is also considered to